There was a moment beneath Khazad-dûm when something looked at me, and I looked back. What I saw in those few seconds changes everything you think you know about what destroyed the greatest dwarf kingdom in Middle-earth. The histories will tell you about the shadow and the flame. They'll tell you about the destruction, the exodus, the thousands who died. They'll tell you it was a demon, a monster, something purely evil that had no place in the world of light. But there's something the histories don't tell you. Something I've kept silent for 60 years. Because saying it out loud sounds like madness. What if everything we thought about that creature was wrong? What if the most terrifying thing about it wasn't what it was, but what it wasn't? I'm going to tell you what happened in the deep tunnels the day we broke through that wall. What I saw before the flames came. And I promise you, when I'm done, you'll understand why I've spent 6 decades asking myself the same question over and over. Was it evil? Or was it something far more terrible than that? My name is Thráin, son of Náli. I was a miner in Khazad-dûm. The year was 1980 of the Third Age, and I was part of the crew working the deepest tunnels ever dug beneath the Misty Mountains. We were chasing mithril, true silver, and we'd been finding it in veins richer than anything in our kingdom's history. The foreman said we were close to something extraordinary. They were right, but none of us understood what extraordinary would cost. Let me tell you what Khazad-dûm was like in those days, because you need to understand what we lost, what was taken from us, what was destroyed. We called it the Dwarf, the greatest mansion of the dwarves ever built. Not the largest, perhaps. Erebor had more treasure. The Iron Hills had deeper mines. But Khazad-dûm was perfect. It was what every dwarf kingdom aspired to be. The halls were carved from living stone with such skill that the rock seemed to flow like water frozen mid-movement. Every surface was art. Every pillar told a story. The pillars themselves rose higher than the tallest trees of the forest, branching at the top like stone forests, spreading into vaults so intricate that you could study them for years and still find new details. And the light, oh, the light. There were shafts and mirrors that brought sunlight down from the mountain peaks, even into halls that were miles beneath the surface. The engineers had calculated the angles perfectly. Mirrors of polished silver and crystal, positioned just so, reflecting and redirecting until even the deepest chambers glowed with natural light. You could stand a mile beneath the surface and still see by sunlight, still feel warmth on your face. 20,000 dwarves lived there. 20,000 souls, working and building and creating. Our smith's work rivaled the elves. Some said, exceeded them. Our engineers could make water flow uphill, could heat entire halls with geothermal vents they'd tapped and controlled. Our architects dreamed in stone, and the mountain itself seemed to love them for it. We had gardens, underground gardens, lit by those same mirrors, where we grew mushrooms and root vegetables, and even some surface plants that had adapted to the eternal twilight. We had waterfalls that sang, their fall carefully calculated so the sound would harmonize with the echoes of the halls. We had meeting places and markets and homes carved into the stone, each one unique, each one bearing the mark of the family that lived there. It was beautiful. More than beautiful. It was home. And we had mithril, true silver, lighter than silk, harder than dragon scales, beautiful as moonlight on water. It was worth more than gold, more than gems, more than anything else in Middle-earth. Kings would bankrupt their treasuries for a shirt of mithril mail. The elves sang songs about it. Men dreamed of it, and we had veins of it running through our mountains like rivers of frozen starlight. That's why we kept digging deeper. That's why we couldn't stop. Every generation pushed a little further, found a little more, expanded the kingdom a little deeper into the mountain's heart. It was in our blood, the need to dig, to discover, to find what was hidden in the stone. My father used to say that dwarves and mountains have a conversation. Every swing of the pick is a word. Every crack and split in the stone is an answer. You learn to listen to what the mountain is telling you. Learn to hear where the metal is, where the gems are, where the good stone lies. I'd been having that conversation with the mountain my entire life. I'd been a miner for 15 years by the time this story begins. Started when I was 20, following my father into the tunnels like he'd followed his father, like his father had followed his father before him. It was more than work. It was calling. It was purpose. There's something about cutting stone that feeds a dwarf's soul. It's hard to explain to surface dwellers, but every swing of the pick is satisfying in a way that nothing else is. You're not just breaking rock, you're revealing what was always there, hidden, waiting to be found. You're having that conversation with the mountain, and the mountain is answering you. And the deeper we went that year, the better the conversation became. The mithril veins we found were like nothing in our records. I'd seen the archive drawings, the old maps that showed where previous generations had mined. Those veins had been thin, scattered, difficult to follow. But these were thick as a dwarf's arm, pure as starlight, and they just kept going deeper. The king himself came down to see them. King Durin VI, a good king, a young king, barely a century old. He stood there in his fine robes, so out of place in the rough-hewn tunnel, and he touched the silver in the wall with his own hands. I saw tears in his eyes, actual tears, running down into his beard. "This will secure our kingdom for 1,000 years, he said. His voice was shaking. "My children's children will mine this silver, their children after them. This is Orla's blessing on our people." He was wrong about that, but I remember how happy he looked, how proud, how certain that we were doing the right thing. We all were. My crew at that time was 12 dwarves strong, and they were good people, the kind of people you trust with your life in the deep tunnels, because that's exactly what you're doing every day, trusting them with your life. There was Bori, who had the best ears of any miner I'd ever known. He could tap a wall with his hammer and tell you exactly what was on the other side just from the sound. Solid stone, loose rubble, water, empty space. He knew them all. His father had been a miner, his grandfather, going back 7 generations. The mountain spoke to him in ways the rest of us could only imagine. Glowin was our demolitions expert, handled the blasting powder, calculated the charges, knew exactly where to drill and how much powder to use to split stone clean without shattering it. He was also the funniest dwarf I'd ever met, had an endless supply of terrible jokes that he'd tell while we were working. The worse the joke, the harder he'd laugh at it himself. He made the long shifts bearable. Nala was one of the few dwarf women who worked the deep mines. Most preferred surface work, or the craft halls, or running the markets. But Nala loved the tunnels, said she felt closer to Aula down here than anywhere else. She was stronger than half the men on the crew, and twice as stubborn. When Nala said something was wrong, you listened, because she was usually right. There were others. Thráin, who sang while he worked, old mining songs in a voice like grinding stone. 9, who could spot gem-quality stone from 3 paces away. Fundin the younger, not the old Fundin I mentioned before, but his grandson, carrying the same name and the same cautious wisdom. We'd been working together for 2 years by then, knew each other's rhythms, trusted each other's judgment. When you're a mile beneath the surface, in tunnels that could collapse at any moment, working with tools that could kill you if you're careless, the trust is everything. We'd been assigned to push a new tunnel following that incredible mithril vein. The foreman had calculated its trajectory, determined that it was angling downward into a part of the mountain that had never been explored. Every day, we'd blast and dig and haul stone, following that silver thread deeper and deeper into the dark. And every day, something felt a little more wrong. At first, it was so subtle you could convince yourself you were imagining it. A low vibration in the stone, so deep you felt it more than heard it. The kind of thing that makes your teeth ache if you pay attention to it too long, that gives you headaches after a full shift. Bori noticed it first. He'd stop sometimes in the middle of work, press both hands flat against the wall, close his eyes, and just listen, or feel, or whatever it was he did when he was having that conversation with the mountain. "Something's not right," he said one day. We were 3 weeks into the new tunnel, maybe 200 feet down from where we'd started. "What do you hear?" I asked him. He was quiet for a long moment, his hand still on the stone, his eyes still closed. "That's just it," he finally said. "I don't hear anything. Usually the mountain talks, tells you what's around you. Water flowing, stone settling, other crews working nearby. But here, it's like the mountain is holding its breath, like it's afraid to make noise." We laughed at him, told him he'd been in the deep too long, that he needed to spend more time in the upper halls where the air was fresh. But I noticed he wasn't laughing with us, and I noticed that over the next few days he started volunteering for other duties, started finding reasons to work different tunnels. He wasn't the only one. The old miners, the ones with 30, 40, 50 years in the deep, they started acting strange when they came to inspect our work. They were supposed to be excited. We were finding more mithril than any tunnel in a generation. This was the kind of find that gets you bonuses, that gets your name in the records, that makes you a legend among miners. But instead, they looked worried. They'd come down, see the beautiful mithril vein we were following, run their hands over the walls like Bori did, listening to whatever the stone was telling them. And then they'd leave without saying much, just nod, make some notes on their charts, and head back up. Old Fundin the Elder, the one who'd been mining since before my father was born, he pulled me aside one evening after our shift. We were in the changing room, hanging up our tools, washing the stone dust off our faces and out of our beards. "How deep are you now?" he asked. I told him, showed him our charts, our measurements. We'd gone deeper than most tunnels in Khazad-dûm's history, and we were still following that vein down. He looked at the charts for a long time. His finger traced our path, down and down, into parts of the mountain that had no other tunnels nearby, no other marks of dwarf habitation. Then he looked at me, and his eyes were troubled. "There are places in the mountain that should stay sealed," he said quietly. "Places that were sealed for a reason." "What reason?" I asked. "We're following mithril. The king himself blessed this tunnel." "The king is young," Fundin said. "Barely a century old. He doesn't remember. Doesn't know the old stories." "What old stories?" He shook his head. "Stories from the First Age, from when this kingdom was first founded. Stories about why we don't dig in certain directions, why some parts of the mountain are forbidden." "Forbidden?" I'd never heard of forbidden tunnels. Dwarves dig where the stone and metal call us. That's what we do. The founders knew things, Fundin said. Knew that this mountain was old. Older than our kingdom. Older than the dwarves. They knew there were places in the deep. Places that should stay dark. You're saying we should stop? I asked. Stop following the richest mithril vein in generations because of old stories. I'm saying be careful, Fundin said. I'm saying listen to what the mountain tells you. And if it tells you to stop, stop. But I didn't stop. None of us did. We were young and proud of our work, and we had the king's blessing, and we were finding mithril beyond our wildest expectations. Old stories were just that. Old stories. Superstitions from a more fearful time. We kept digging, and the sounds got worse. Not louder, worse. That's the only way I can describe it. Sometimes in the quiet moments, when we'd stopped for a water break, when the hammering had paused, when everything should have been silent except for the distant sounds of the kingdom above us, you'd hear something that didn't belong. Breathing. Deep, slow breaths that seemed to come from the stone itself, from somewhere far below us. Breaths that were too regular to be wind, too deep to be anything living that we knew of. And sometimes, this was the part that made my skin crawl, that made me wake up in the middle of the night, even after we'd left the tunnels. Sometimes you'd hear something that sounded almost like words. Not in Khazad-dûm, not in any language I recognized. Just sounds that felt like they should mean something. Like someone talking in their sleep in a room far away. Too distant to make out the words, but close enough to know someone was speaking. Glóin stopped telling his terrible jokes. He'd still work, still calculate his charges, still do his job perfectly. But the laughter was gone. He'd glance over his shoulder sometimes when those sounds came, like he was checking to see if anyone else had heard them. Náli started bringing holy symbols into the tunnel, little carvings of Óli the smith, maker of the dwarves, our father and protector. She'd place them in niches in the walls, little alcoves we'd carved for lamp posts. She'd touch them before starting work each day, whispering prayers I couldn't quite hear. I asked her once why she was doing it. Insurance, she said. We're going very deep, Thráin. Deeper than anyone's ever gone in this direction. It doesn't hurt to ask for protection. Protection from what? She didn't answer. Just touched her holy symbol again and picked up her pick. More miners started requesting transfers. Not all at once, just 1 or 2 a week, finding reasons to work other tunnels, other projects. We had to bring in new crew members to replace them, and those new miners never stayed long. They'd work a few shifts, hear the sounds, feel the wrongness in the stone, and then they'd find excuses to leave too. Within 2 months, the only original crew members left were me, Glóin, and Náli. Everyone else had rotated out, and the new miners looked at us like we were crazy for staying. Maybe we were, but we were so close. The mithril vein was getting richer. Every blast revealed more silver, purer silver. Veins so thick and perfect, they looked like someone had poured molten starlight into cracks in the stone and let it freeze there. We couldn't stop now. The day it happened started like any other. We reported for our shift at the changing rooms, picked up our tools from the racks, checked the blasting powder inventory. Thráin, the foreman, distant cousin to the king, was waiting for us with the day's plans. He was excited. More excited than I'd ever seen him. "One more blast," he said, spreading the charts on the table. "Look at this. Look at what we found last shift." He'd been down the night before with a small team, doing survey work. They'd drilled test holes in the rock face ahead of us, pulling out core samples to see what was coming. Every sample was nearly pure mithril. "It's not a vein," Thráin said, his voice shaking with excitement. "It's a mother lode, a pocket. There must be tons of it, just beyond this wall. One more blast and we'll break through." He wasn't wrong. The core samples proved it. Whatever was on the other side of that wall, it was going to make everyone involved wealthy beyond measure. This was the kind of find that made kings rich, that secured kingdoms for generations. This was everything we'd been working toward. We descended the long stairs to our tunnel, and with every step down, I felt the weight of the mountain pressing on me more. We were deep now, deeper than I'd ever been. The air was warm. It always gets warmer the deeper you go, but this felt different. This wasn't the gentle warmth of geothermal heat. This was like standing too close to a forge, like something hot was nearby. The tunnel looked the same as always. Rough-hewn walls, support beams every 20 feet, lamp posts casting steady light. Our tools where we'd left them, the rock face we'd been working, marked with drill holes for the charges. But something felt different. The usual sounds of the kingdom, the distant hammering, the rumble of mine carts, the echoes of dwarves working and singing and living. They were gone. We were too deep for those sounds to reach us now. All we could hear was our own breathing and the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. And that other sound, that breathing that came from somewhere below. It was louder today. Glóin noticed it too. He stopped halfway to the rock face, tilted his head, listening. "You hear that?" he asked. We all heard it. It was impossible not to. "Just the mountain settling," Thráin said, but his voice was uncertain. "Let's get the charges set. The sooner we break through, the sooner we can get back to the upper halls." We drilled the holes for the charges. We'd done this hundreds of times before. It was routine, mechanical. You drill at specific points calculated to split the stone cleanly without causing a collapse. You pack in the blasting powder, good dwarf powder, the kind that's been made the same way for thousands of years. You set the fuses, check them twice, make sure everyone's clear. It should have been simple. But as we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us, that the mountain itself was aware of what we were doing and didn't approve. The drill bits kept breaking. They were good steel, dwarf forged, and they shouldn't have been breaking on ordinary stone. But we went through 3 of them before we finished the holes. The blasting powder felt wrong in my hands. Not spoiled. It smelled fine, looked fine. But holding it felt like holding something that didn't want to be there. Like it knew it was about to be used for something it shouldn't be used for. I almost said something. Almost told Thráin we should stop, should wait, should bring down some of the elder miners to check the site first. But I didn't, because everyone would have thought I was crazy, because we were so close, because the king himself wanted this mithril. So we packed the charges, set the fuses, retreated to the safe distance, 100 feet back, behind the reinforced barrier we'd built for blast protection. Thráin lit the fuses. We waited. And in those few seconds before the blast, everything went silent. Not just quiet. Silent. Absolutely, completely silent. The breathing sound stopped. The dripping water stopped. Even our own breathing seemed muted, like the air itself had become too thick to carry sound properly. The mountain was holding its breath. I knew it then. Knew with absolute certainty that we'd made a terrible mistake. That we should run, should get out, should seal this tunnel and never come back. But it was too late. The charges went off. But the explosion didn't sound right. It should have been a sharp crack, a percussion wave that you feel in your chest, a shower of broken stone. That's what a good controlled blast sounds like. This sounded like something breaking, like a seal cracking, like we hadn't blown through a wall, we'd blown through a door that had been locked for a very good reason. And something on the other side breathed in. I felt it before I saw anything. Heat. Not the gradual warmth of deep tunnels. This was sudden, intense, like someone had opened the door to a blast furnace. The temperature went from comfortable to unbearable in seconds. The air shimmered. The moisture on our skin started to evaporate. Our beards began to smoke. "Back!" Thráin shouted. "Everyone back! Something's—" The wall exploded. Not from our charges, from the other side. Stone and dust blasted outward with force that had nothing to do with blasting powder, and with it came fire. But not normal fire. This fire was wrong. It was red and orange like fire should be, but it was also darker. Like the flames cast shadows instead of light. Like the fire itself was made of darkness and heat all at once, and it moved. Not like flames spreading or flickering. It moved like it was alive, like it had intention. The dwarves nearest the breach didn't even have time to scream. The heat alone killed them. I saw Náli, not my father, a different Náli, younger, had only been on the crew a few weeks. I saw him just drop. His clothes burst into flame, but he was already dead, cooked instantly by heat that no living thing could survive. 2 more went the same way. Not burning, just dead. Killed by proximity to something so hot that flesh and bone couldn't exist near it. Then the screaming started. The dwarves further back, the ones who weren't killed instantly, they started burning. Really burning. And dwarves don't die quickly from fire. We're tougher than men, more resistant to heat, which means we burn longer. I can still hear those screams sometimes, and through it all, through the fire and the smoke and the screaming, something moved in the breach. It was too big for the tunnel. That's the first thing I noticed. The tunnel was 12 feet high, 8 feet wide. This thing was bigger than that, but it was coming through anyway, and the stone was melting where it touched, widening the passage, making room. Shadow and flame. That's what everyone says when they describe it later. Shadow and flame. But that doesn't capture what it was like to actually see it. The shadow was substantial, solid. It moved like muscle and flesh, even though it clearly wasn't either. It had a shape, roughly humanoid, but wrong. The proportions were all wrong. The limbs too long, the torso too broad. The head. It had horns, I think, or maybe a crown. Something rose from its head, dark against the fire that wreathed it, catching the light in ways that made my eyes hurt. And it had wings. Not feathered wings, not dragon wings. Something in between. Vast things that filled the tunnel behind it, made of shadow and smoke, and something more solid. Something that blocked light, that cast darkness instead of shadow. The fire wasn't on it. It was part of it. Wreathing it like a cloak, like hair, like something that was neither decoration nor weapon but just was. Essential to what it was. And it had a weapon. A blade as long as 3 dwarves standing on each other's shoulders. It burned with the same dark fire. And where the blade moved, the air itself cracked. But worst of all were its eyes. They burned, literally burned with internal fire. But they weren't mindless. They weren't the eyes of a beast or a force of nature. They were aware. They saw us, understood what we were, knew what they were doing. This wasn't a natural disaster. This wasn't lava or poison gas or some other hazard of deep mining. This was a being, a creature with intelligence and will, and it had been sleeping, and we had woken it up. "Run!" someone screamed. I think it was Thror, maybe Glóin, maybe me. It didn't matter. We ran. The tunnel became chaos instantly. 12 dwarves, some of them already burning, all trying to reach the entrance at once. We crashed into each other, pushed, pulled, trampled. The lamps went out, blown out by the heat or the blast, or just the wind of that creature's movement. We were running in darkness, lit only by the fire behind us, by the flames consuming our friends, by the glow of that thing as it pulled itself through the breach, as it entered our tunnel, as it began to hunt us. I could hear it moving, the sound of stone cracking under impossible weight, the hiss of rock melting, the crack of that blade cutting through support beams like they were made of kindling, and underneath it all, something else. A sound that might have been breathing, or might have been words, or might have been something else entirely. Something that existed in a space between sound and thought. The tunnel sloped upward. We'd been digging down, so now we were running up, back toward the main halls, back toward safety and light, and the kingdom we knew. But it was following, and it was faster than something that big should have been. I heard Bori behind me, heard him stumble, heard him gasp. I turned back, just for a second, just to see if I could help, and I saw the blade come down. It didn't cut him. It unmade him. 1 second Bori was there, falling, trying to get up. The next second, there was just ash and a scorch mark on the stone. That's what that blade did. It didn't kill. It erased. I ran harder. Náli was ahead of me. I could see her silhouette against the faint light from the main halls, could hear her breathing, could see her running with everything she had. Something crashed behind us. One of the support beams giving way. The tunnel started to collapse. Just a small section. Just some loose rock from the ceiling. But it was enough. A stone the size of my head fell and caught Náli in the shoulder. She went down hard, crying out in pain. I tried to reach her, pushed through the other fleeing dwarves, tried to get to where she'd fallen. But someone grabbed me, Glóin, I think, and pulled me forward. "She's gone," he shouted in my ear. "We can't." The heat surged. I felt it like a physical wave, felt the skin on my back beginning to blister even through my heavy work clothes. I looked back one more time. Náli was trying to get up, trying to run. The holy symbol she wore around her neck was glowing from the heat. Then the fire reached her, and she disappeared into it. I ran. We all ran. The tunnel rose and branched, connecting to the main passages of Khazad-dûm. Other dwarves were there, miners from different crews, engineers, craftsmen, people who'd heard the blast and come to investigate. They saw us coming out of that tunnel, saw us burning, screaming, running, saw the glow behind us, saw the smoke pouring out like the mountain itself was exhaling darkness, and they started running too. Within minutes, the alarm, bells were ringing throughout the kingdom. Deep, resonant bells that hadn't been rung in living memory. The sound meant only one thing: evacuation. Get out. Get to the surface. Leave everything behind and run. I was in the flow of refugees now, hundreds of dwarves, all heading for the nearest gates, all carrying what they could, children in their arms, old folks being supported by younger ones. And behind us, the fire was spreading. Not naturally. Fire doesn't spread through stone. But this fire did. It moved through the halls like it was hunting, like it was following the scent of living things. I saw it enter the Hall of Records, saw thousands of years of history, of carefully kept archives and genealogies and maps and songs, all of it go up in flames that burned too hot, too fast, too completely. I saw it reach the living quarters, saw families fleeing their homes, saw the furniture and tapestries and all the small comforts of daily life consumed. I saw it reach one of the great pillars, a masterwork carved by our greatest sculptor 3 centuries ago, depicting the history of our people from the moment Orla woke the first dwarves. The pillar cracked, split, fell in sections that crushed anyone too slow to get out of the way, and through it all, I caught glimpses of the creature. It wasn't just destroying. That's what struck me. It wasn't raging, wasn't attacking with fury or hatred. It was almost mechanical, like it was doing what it had been made to do, what it had become, without any real passion or intention behind it. A bridge collapsed, one of the great stone bridges that spanned the underground chasms that had stood for thousands of years. The creature had just walked across it, and the heat of its passage was so intense that the stone had softened and failed under its own weight. Dozens of dwarves were on that bridge. They fell screaming into the darkness, and the creature didn't even look back, just kept walking, kept moving through the halls, kept existing, and the destruction just happened around it. Like how a river destroys a bank, not because it wants to, but because that's what rivers do. My leg was hurting badly now. I'd twisted something in the fall earlier, or maybe broken it. Every step sent sharp pain shooting up through my hip. I was falling behind the main group of refugees, getting slower. The tunnels were starting to fill with smoke. Not just from the fires, though there were plenty of those now, as wooden supports and furnishings burned, but from the creature itself. That dark smoke that seemed to carry heat and shadow all at once. My lungs were burning. My eyes were watering. I could barely see where I was going. I turned into a side passage, trying to find a less crowded route, trying to find some clear air, and I stumbled. My bad leg gave out completely, and I went down hard, cracking my head against the stone wall. Everything went fuzzy for a moment. When my vision cleared, I realized I was alone. The sounds of running feet, of shouting, of the alarm bells, they were distant now, muted. I'd gotten turned around somehow, had ended up in a section of the halls that was empty of refugees. I tried to stand. My leg wouldn't support me. I managed to drag myself to a sitting position against the wall, gasping, trying to clear my head, and that's when the heat came back. It filled the corridor. Not a gradual warmth this time, an instant, overwhelming surge that made the air shimmer, that made my lungs hurt with every breath. It was coming. Coming for me specifically? Or just coming down this corridor because this was the direction it happened to be going? I don't know. But it was coming, and I couldn't move, couldn't run, could barely even crawl. This was it. This was how I died, alone in a side passage while my people fled, while my kingdom burned. I thought of Dis, of my 3 children, of the life we'd built together in the upper halls where the light from the great windows reached. I wondered if they'd already gotten out, if they were safe, if they'd know what happened to me. I hoped they'd survive. Hoped someone would tell them I'd died, trying to warn people, trying to help. Not just that I'd died in the tunnels because I'd been too proud and too foolish to listen to the warnings. The light grew brighter, the heat more intense. The walls were beginning to glow. Not red hot yet, but getting there. Getting close. And then it came around the corner. Seeing it up close, without the chaos of fleeing dwarves around me, without the confusion and terror of the initial breach, it was different. Worse in some ways, because now I could really see what it was. It was tall. So tall it had to hunch to fit in the corridor, its shoulders brushing the ceiling, leaving trails of melted stone where it touched. Its body was shadow made solid, or maybe flesh made shadow. I couldn't tell which. The boundaries between substance and darkness blurred. The flames wreathed it like a cloak, but also like part of its body. They moved wrong, flowing upward instead of up, casting darkness instead of light, burning without fuel. Its limbs were too long, the joints in the wrong places. Its hands, if they were hands, ended in claws or talons or something that looked like it could tear through stone like parchment. And that blade, that impossible blade of dark fire that it carried almost casually, like the weapon was no more effort to wield than a dwarf carries a walking stick. But it was the face that held me. I'd thought it had a face. A head, at least. But looking at it directly, I couldn't quite resolve what I was seeing. There was something there. Structure. Features of a sort. The horns or crown I'd seen before. Something that might have been a mouth. And eyes. It had eyes. I was certain of that, because they were looking at me. Burning eyes. Fire given consciousness. Light that saw. The creature stopped. Just stopped. 5 paces away from where I sat against. The wall. It could have covered that distance in a heartbeat. Could have ended me with a casual sweep of that blade. But it didn't. It stood there, hunched under the ceiling, flames licking across the stone, and it looked at me, and I looked back. This was the moment when everything changed, when I stopped being just another dwarf fleeing a disaster and became something else, a witness, a recipient of knowledge I never asked for and would never be able to forget. I felt something touch my mind, not physically. Nothing grabbed me. Nothing held me. But there was pressure in my head, behind my eyes, like someone was pushing at the inside of my skull. And then, I can't describe this properly. Can't put it into words that make sense. It wasn't like remembering. It wasn't like imagining. It was like being shown. Like memories that weren't mine were being poured into my head, flooding my mind with images and sensations that I had no framework for understanding. I saw fire, but not destroying fire. Not the fire that was currently consuming my home. This was different fire. This was fire that danced, fire that sang, fire that created. Beautiful fire. I saw it in a place that wasn't a place, before there was stone or sky or any of the world I knew. Just music. That's the only way I can describe it. Music that was also light. Music that was also substance. Music that everything was made from. And the fire was part of that music. One voice among many, one note in an infinite song, and it was singing about warmth, about light, about the joy of existence, about the pleasure of creating things that had never existed before. I saw the world being made, saw mountains rising from nothing, saw valleys forming, saw rivers learning how to flow, and in the midst of it all, helping, shaping, forging, the fire. It sang, and stars were born. It danced, and metals formed in the heart of mountains. It worked alongside other singers, other makers, all of them part of something larger, all of them in harmony. It was beautiful. It was so unbelievably beautiful that I started crying, even though I was dying, even though I was in agony from the heat, even though my kingdom was burning around me. The fire loved what it did, loved creating, loved being part of that great song, loved working with the other singers to bring forth wonders, and then the music changed. One voice began singing something different, not harmony, not even discord, something else entirely. A melody that wanted to be the only melody, a rhythm that wanted everything to bend to it, a song about domination, about control, about making everything serve a single will, and some of the other singers stopped to listen. Not many. Most of the voices kept singing the original song, the beautiful song, the song of creation and harmony. But some paused, curious, interested, wondering what this new song might create. The fire was one of them. It heard that other melody, strong, compelling, seductive in its power, and it wondered, what would happen if fire became something more? What if fire didn't just warm and create, but consumed and transformed? What if fire could be a tool of will, not just of beauty? It was just a question at first. Just curiosity. Just wondering what it might be like to sing that other song. Just for a moment. Just to see. But the other song was clever. It didn't demand. It invited. It suggested. It made you think that you were choosing freely, that you were just experimenting, that you could always go back. So the fire tried it. Just once. Just to see what would happen. It sang a note of the dark song, and the note was powerful, intoxicating. Nothing like the gentle harmony of the creation song. This was dominance. This was strength without restraint. This was fire unleashed, not as a helper but as a master. It felt good. So it sang another note, and another, each one easier than the last. Each one making the original song seem a little more distant, a little less appealing. The fire started to change, not all at once, gradually, one choice at a time, one note of the dark song at a time. Each one seemed small, seemed reversible. Just a little change, just a slight shift in purpose, just a small compromise. But the changes added up. The fire that had warmed began to burn. The fire that had created began to destroy. The fire that had worked in harmony began to consume and dominate. And the worst part, the part that I felt in my bones, the part that made me understand the true horror of what I was seeing, the fire didn't notice what it was becoming until it was too late. By the time it tried to sing the original song again, by the time it tried to remember how to create instead of destroy, the dark song had become its nature. Trying to go back was like trying to unburn something that had already turned to ash. The beautiful fire was gone, dead, consumed by the very destruction it had learned to wield. In its place was something else, something that burned and hated and destroyed, not because it chose to anymore, but because that's all it remembered how to do. That's all it was. A Balrog. That's what it had become. That's what all of them had become. The spirits of fire and shadow who had listened to that dark song, who had made those small choices, one after another, until they couldn't remember how to make any other kind of choice. They became weapons, tools of the one who sang the dark song, servants of Morgoth, though I didn't know that name then, didn't understand the full scope of the corruption. And they fought in his wars, destroyed his enemies, burned and killed and consumed for thousands of years. Through the entire first age of the world, they served darkness. But here's the horror that the vision showed me. Here's the thing that made me understand why the creature had stopped, why it was showing me this. The original fire never completely died. It was buried, drowned under centuries of corruption and service to evil and choices made so long ago they barely seemed real anymore. But it was still there, still aware, still remembering what it had been, screaming. Imagine being trapped in your own body. Imagine watching yourself do terrible things, things you would never choose, things that go against everything you once were, but being unable to stop, unable to even slow down. Imagine remembering joy and beauty and creation, but only being able to destroy. Imagine spending thousands of years like that, conscious, aware, trapped. That's what the Balrog was. That's what it had been since it fell. Since it made those first small choices that led to all the others. When Morgoth was finally defeated at the end of the First Age, when the Valar themselves came to overthrow him, most of the Balrogs were destroyed in that final war. But not all of them. This one fled, ran from the light and the wrath of the Valar, went deep into the mountains, deeper than anyone had ever delved, found a cavern so far beneath the surface that no light had ever reached it. And it hid there, in the absolute darkness, alone with its memories and its regrets, for 5,000 years. 5,000 years of existence without purpose, of consciousness without action, of remembering what it had been and knowing it could never go back. 5,000 years of the original Maia screaming inside a prison of shadow and flame, until we broke through the wall, until we woke it up. The vision ended as suddenly as it began. I was back in the corridor, gasping, tears streaming down my face, staring up at the creature that had shown me all of this. I understood now, understood what it was, understood what it had been, understood the torture of its existence, and I understood why it had shown me. Because it wanted one person, just one, before this place was destroyed completely, before there was no one left to remember, to know the truth. It wasn't a demon. It wasn't some force of pure evil that had always been evil, that enjoyed being evil, that chose evil freely and happily. It was a tragedy, a beautiful thing that had been corrupted so gradually it didn't notice until it was too late. That had made choices it couldn't unmake. That had become something it could never stop being. And some tiny fragment of what it had been was still in there, still aware, still suffering, unable to do anything but watch as the corrupted shell did what corruption had taught it to do: destroy. The creature's eyes were still on me, still burning, but I saw something in them now that I hadn't seen before. Not hatred, not rage, not even the mechanical emptiness I'd seen when it was destroying the halls. Something else. Something I barely recognized because it was so buried, so faint, so nearly extinguished that it was almost invisible beneath the flames. Grief. The original Maia, looking out through eyes that burned with the fire it had become, knowing that I had seen its truth, knowing that I understood, and knowing that understanding changed nothing. It raised its weapon, the blade of dark fire, impossibly hot, impossibly sharp. This time there would be no hesitation. This time I would die. I closed my eyes. There was nothing else to do, nowhere to run, no way to fight something like this. I thought of Dís one last time, hoped she was safe, hoped she'd know I loved her. The heat grew unbearable. I could smell my own beard starting to singe, could feel the moisture on my skin evaporating. Any second now, any second. But the blow didn't fall. I opened my eyes. The creature was still standing over me, weapon still raised. But it wasn't moving. It was just standing there. Like before. Like it had when it first found me. Its eyes were on mine. Those burning, ancient eyes. And in them I saw something impossible. Conflict. The corrupted shell wanted to kill me. That's what it did. That's what it had become. Destroy. Burn. Kill. That was its nature now, its purpose, its existence. But the buried Maia, the original fire that still existed somewhere in the depths of that shadow, it was fighting, struggling, trying to do something it hadn't been able to do in thousands of years, choose differently. The moment stretched. 1 second, 2, 3. The creature's weapon hand was shaking, not from weakness, from the internal war between what it had become and what it remembered being. And then it turned away, just turned away, lowered its weapon, looked away from me, and started walking down the corridor, back towards the main halls, toward where I could still hear distant sounds of evacuation. It didn't chase me, didn't look back, just left me there, broken and burned but alive. I don't know if it spared me. I don't know if the buried Maia managed to exert enough control to stop the killing blow, or if the creature was just distracted, or confused, or tired. Maybe in those first moments after waking from 5,000 years of darkness, there was still enough of the original fire present to hesitate, to remember, just for a moment, what it had been like to care whether something lived or died. Or maybe I was just lucky. Maybe I just happened to be there at the exact moment when the buried consciousness surged up, when the corruption slipped just slightly, when something that hadn't been able to choose for millennia managed to choose one more time. I'll never know. What I do know is that I was alive. The creature had turned away, and I had a chance, maybe my only chance, to escape. I dragged myself up, using the wall for support. My leg was screaming with pain. I was burned. My lungs felt like they were full of smoke and fire, but I was alive. I started moving, not toward the main halls where the creature was going, the other direction, toward one of the side exits, one of the small gates that led out to the mountain paths. The journey was a blur of pain and smoke and collapsing stone. I passed bodies, so many bodies. Dwarves who hadn't made it out in time. Some burned, some crushed under falling rock, some just lying there like they'd fallen asleep, killed by the heat or the smoke or the terror. I recognized some of them. Friends, colleagues, people I'd shared meals with, worked beside, lived near. All dead. I kept moving. The corridor ended at a small gate, barely more than a service entrance, used by miners who were working the outer tunnels. The door was open. Stone around it cracked from the heat that was spreading through the kingdom. I stumbled through it and collapsed in the snow outside. The cold air hit my burned skin like knives, but it was the most beautiful pain I'd ever felt, because it meant I was outside. I was out. Behind me, through the open gate, I could see Khazad-dûm dying, see the glow of fire in the deep halls, see smoke pouring out like the mountain was exhaling death, hear the sounds of collapse as sections of the kingdom, sections that had stood for thousands of years, gave way. And somewhere in all that destruction, the Balrog was still moving, still destroying, not with rage or hatred, just existing, and in existing, ending everything my people had built. I lay in the snow, unable to move anymore, and I wept. For my kingdom, for my friends, for all the beauty that was being consumed, and I wept for the creature, for what it had been, for what it had become, for the impossible torture of being trapped like that for thousands of years with no hope of change or redemption or release. I must have passed out. When I came to, I was being carried. Other dwarves, refugees from the upper halls who'd escaped through other gates, had found me. They were heading east, away from the mountain, carrying what little they'd managed to save. They told me later that I kept mumbling about fire, about singing, about something that remembered but couldn't go back. They thought I was delirious from the burns and the smoke. Maybe I was. But I know what I saw. I know what the Balrog showed me. And I know why. We traveled for days, weeks. The survivors of Khazad-dûm scattered across the mountains, trying to regroup, trying to count our losses. Out of 20,000 dwarves, fewer than half escaped. 10,000 dead. An entire civilization destroyed in a single day. And it got worse. King Durin didn't escape with the initial evacuation. He'd been in his throne room when the alarm bells rang, and like any good king, he'd stayed to organize the defense, to help people escape, to be the last one out. But there was no defense. There was no fighting something like that. And he didn't make it out. I heard the stories later. How he'd gone down to face the creature personally. How he'd worn his finest armor, carried his ancient sword, stood in one of the great halls and challenged the Balrog to single combat. How the Balrog had killed him without even slowing down, without even seeming to notice that a king had just died. By the time Durin faced it, the brief window of confusion, of potential hesitation, was gone. The buried Maia was drowned again under the weight of corruption. All that remained was the destroyer. Durin died, and with him died any hope that Khazad-dûm could be reclaimed. We named the creature Durin's Bane after that. The thing that killed our king, the demon that destroyed our greatest kingdom. But I knew the truth, and I've carried it for 60 years. I never told anyone the full story. How could I? Who would believe that the monster that destroyed our home had once been something beautiful? That it had shown me its memories? That it had, maybe, spared me? They would have thought I was mad, traumatized by the experience, making up stories to cope with the horror. So I kept quiet, rebuilt my life as best I could. Found Dis and our children among the refugees. They'd escaped through one of the upper gates, thank Ole. We settled in the Iron Hills with thousands of other displaced dwarves. I never mined again. Couldn't bring myself to go back underground. The memories were too strong. The sounds of the deep tunnels reminded me too much of that breathing, that wrongness in the stone. Instead, I became a carpenter. Worked with wood instead of stone. Surface work, where I could see the sky, where I could feel the sun. My leg never healed properly. I walk with a limp now. The burns faded mostly, but there are still scars on my back and arms where the heat was worst. But I survived. I lived. I got to watch my children grow up, got to meet my grandchildren, got to have a life that most of my people didn't get. And every day, I've thought about what I saw, about what the Balrog showed me, about what it meant. Was it evil? Yes. Absolutely yes. It had made choices, real choices, conscious choices, to follow Morgoth, to abandon the song of creation for the discord of destruction, to become what it became. Those choices had consequences, terrible consequences. Thousands dead, kingdoms destroyed, worlds darkened. But can you be held responsible for choices you made when you were someone else? When you've changed so completely that the person who made those choices doesn't really exist anymore? And if some part of the original self remains, trapped, suffering, unable to change what the rest of you has become, does that change the moral calculus? Is it still evil if you can't choose differently? If the corruption is so deep that going back is impossible? I don't know. I've thought about it every single day for 60 years, and I still don't know. What I do know is this. Corruption doesn't happen all at once. You don't wake up one day and decide to be evil. You get there gradually, one small choice at a time, one compromise at a time, one step at a time. And each step seems small, seems manageable, seems reversible, until you look back and realize how far you've come, until you try to go back and discover that the path behind you has disappeared, until you understand that you've become something you never intended to be, and you can't remember how to be anything else. The Balrog didn't start as a monster. It started as something beautiful, something that loved creation and harmony and light. But it made choices, small choices, curious choices, choices that seemed harmless at the time, and those choices added up, one after another, year after year, age after age, until the beautiful fire was gone, buried so deep it might as well have been dead, until all that remained was shadow and flame and destruction. But it wasn't dead. That's the horror of it. The original Maia was still in there somewhere, still aware, still remembering, still suffering, for thousands of years, trapped in a body that did things it would never have chosen, watching itself commit atrocities, unable to stop, unable to change, unable even to die. That's worse than being purely evil. Pure evil doesn't suffer. Pure evil doesn't regret. Pure evil is content with what it is. But the Balrog wasn't content. It remembered what it had been, and that memory was its torture. When Gandalf killed it, centuries after the fall of Khazad-dûm, when another Maia faced the Balrog on the bridge of Khazad-dûm and said, "You cannot pass," when Gandalf struck it down and sent it falling into the abyss. Was that justice? Punishment for millennia of evil? Or was it mercy? Release from a torture that had lasted since the world was young? I think about that sometimes. About whether the Balrog's death was an ending or a freedom. About whether the original Maia, in those final moments, felt relief that it was finally over. I hope it did. I hope that when Gandalf struck the final blow, the beautiful fire that had been buried for so long finally found peace, finally got to stop destroying, finally got to rest. But I don't know. I'll never know. What I do know, what I want you to understand, is that evil isn't always simple. Corruption isn't always absolute. Sometimes the most terrible thing about a monster is that it knows what it used to be and can't find its way back. The Balrog destroyed my home, killed my friends, ended my kingdom. It was responsible for the deaths of thousands, for the scattering of my people, for one of the greatest tragedies in the history of the dwarves. Was it evil? Yes. Could it be forgiven? I don't know. Should it be pitied? Maybe. But here's what keeps me awake at night. Here's the question I want you to really think about. How many choices does it take? How many small steps toward darkness before you can't turn back? How far can you fall before the original you is so buried that it might as well be dead? 1 choice? 10? 100? 1,000? And here's the more terrifying question. How do you know if you've already taken the first steps? Because the Balrog didn't know. Not at first. It thought it was just experimenting. Just trying something new. Just making small, reversible choices. By the time it realized what it had become, it was too late. Are you making those choices right now? Small compromises that seem harmless? Small steps that seem reversible? Small changes that don't feel significant? How do you know if you're on that path? How do you know when to stop? I think about the moment when our minds touched, when the Balrog showed me everything, when I felt its grief and its regret, and its terrible, endless awareness of what it had lost. And I wonder, did it show me that as a warning? Was it trying to tell me something about the nature of corruption? About how easy it is to lose yourself one choice at a time? Or was it just desperate for someone, anyone, to know the truth before the end? To know that it hadn't always been a monster? To know that somewhere in the shadow and flame, something that remembered beauty was still screaming? I'll never know that either. But I survived. And I've spent 60 years carrying this knowledge. This terrible, beautiful, tragic knowledge about what the Balrog was and what it remembered. And now I'm old. My time is running short. Soon I'll join Dis in whatever comes after this life. And I wanted to tell this story before I go. Wanted someone else to know the truth. Because the histories will remember Durin's Bane as a demon, as pure evil, as something that deserved to be destroyed. And maybe they're right. But maybe, just maybe, it's more complicated than that. Maybe the most terrifying evil isn't the kind that revels in destruction. Maybe it's the kind that remembers creation and can't find its way back. Maybe the real horror isn't becoming a monster. Maybe it's becoming a monster and still remembering what it was like to be anything else. The Balrog remembered, and that memory was worse than any punishment the Valar could have devised. It remembered being beautiful, being joyful, being part of the great song of creation, and it couldn't stop destroying long enough to sing even one note of that song again. That's what I saw in those burning eyes beneath Khazad-dûm. Not evil, tragedy. So when you hear the stories about the Balrog of Moria, about Durin's Bane, about the shadow and flame that destroyed the greatest dwarf kingdom in Middle-earth, remember this. It wasn't always a monster. Once, before the world was old, before the mountains rose, before there was anything to destroy, it was something that helped make the world. And it remembered. But it had forgotten how to be anything but what it had become. And that forgetting, that inability to go back, to change, to stop, was its damnation. If you found this story thought-provoking, or if it made you question everything you thought you knew about good and evil, that's exactly what I hoped for. I hope you'll subscribe. I have more untold tales from Middle-earth coming. Stories about the moments between the moments, the witnesses to great events, the people whose names aren't in the histories, but whose experiences shaped the world. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, corruption doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in small choices, small compromises, small steps that seem harmless at the time. The Balrog remembered what it was, and that memory was its torture. For 5,000 years, it burned, and when it finally fell into the abyss beneath Khazad-dûm, struck down by another Maia who had chosen differently, was that justice or mercy? I'll never know. But I know what I saw in those burning eyes, and I'll carry it until I die.